Simon Marks joins us, LBC's Washington correspondent. Simon, very good evening. Obviously, this has only just broken. What's the reaction been like in Washington that you've picked up?
Well, the White House was preparing us for this because about an hour ago, Caroline Leavitt, the president's press secretary, was briefing reporters and said she didn't want to get ahead of this announcement, but made it clear that talks between the United States and Ukrainian officials in Jeddah had been very positive. And then, lo and behold, we saw the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, addressing reporters after coming out of those meetings in Jeddah and saying that the way was now clear for intelligence sharing to resume with Ukraine, for President Trump to lift the freeze on military assistance to Ukraine that he had imposed about 10 days ago after that disastrous made-for-TV blow-up between Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. And I think you're absolutely right to pick up, Ian, on the very different tone that we heard the Secretary of State strike there in making that announcement in Jeddah, markedly different in terms from Donald Trump, in terms of saying, right, this now puts the ball in Vladimir Putin's court, and suggesting that if the Russians were now to reject this offer of a 30-day ceasefire by Ukraine, well, the blame would accrue to Russia, but also different in the sense that Marco Rubio specifically said of these conversations, when he was pressed on some of the details of the emotions and the dynamics that were taking place behind the scenes, he said, look, this isn't an episode of Mean Girls. This isn't some kind of made-for-TV reality drama. These are serious, difficult, complicated, nuanced, substantial conversations that are underway between American diplomats and Ukrainian officials. And one can only wonder what might have happened at the White House if President Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance had decided to do what the original plan was when Volodymyr Zelensky visited Washington, to do a quick photo spray in the Oval Office for the press, and then to go behind the scenes for detailed, nuanced, substantive diplomatic discussions. Why we had to endure the made-for-TV bust-up, and then the actual hard work gets done by lower-level officials, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, and their support team in Jeddah, is very unclear. But essentially, at least 10 days has been kind of wasted between the White House blow-up with Zelensky and the actual seemingly concrete making of progress that has taken place in Jeddah today.
Isn't it interesting, though, that it's taken 10 days to reverse this line of, well, we're going to cut off all intelligence sharing with Ukraine, we're going to cut off all the military assistance, and now, of course, it's all back on again, just like that. It's proof of this transactional nature of this presidency, isn't it?
Yeah, but it also raises huge questions for Moscow now, Ian, because, of course, as a result of the suspension of that intelligence sharing and the freeze on military assistance, the Russians have made military gains in Ukraine over just the last few days, and the Ukrainians particularly were put on the back foot by their inability to receive the kind of intelligence that would even have allowed them to sound air raid warnings in Kiev and other cities across the country, which is why we've had Ukrainian parliamentarians on LBC over the last few days saying that the latest civilian deaths in Ukraine, that Donald Trump has complicity in them because of his refusal to provide those intelligence reports to Ukraine and government officials and officials with the armed forces. There will certainly be questions asked about the fighting that has taken place since the president imposed those restrictions on what the United States was going to provide to its 30-year partner, Ukraine, the aggrieved party in this conflict. And now the Russians are essentially going to be asked to agree to this US-brokered ceasefire with Ukraine at a moment when in Ukraine they are on the advance. They're on the march, partly as a result of Donald Trump's determination to parrot Vladimir Putin's talking points and engage in actions that were clearly advantageous to the Russians and very bad news for the Ukrainians. So what Russia does now is going to be the big question.
And more breaking news while you've been talking, Simon. Donald Trump has said he will now invite President Zelensky back to the White House again. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, there is a lot of breaking news on a couple of different fronts taking place here. I'm just pulling up Donald Trump's announcement on that, and you've seen it before I have. So, Volodymyr Zelensky coming back to the White House, according to Donald Trump, at some point. We all knew that was going to happen at some stage. It will be interesting to see what kind of entourage he brings with him, and whether Ukrainian officials this time round are able to pre-game the structure for the meeting. Because if Zelensky gets sucked back into another one of those photo ops in the Oval Office that then become an impromptu 45-minute news conference, that is clearly to his disadvantage and only to Donald Trump's advantage. The other breaking news of this hour is coming from Canada, where the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, is basically backing down on the electricity tariffs that he imposed only yesterday on the United States, that enraged the American president, led Donald Trump to announce fresh retaliatory tariffs against Canada today. Doug Ford now says that he is suspending the electricity surcharges that he introduced only 24 hours ago. He says he's been talking to the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. He wants to bring a Canadian government delegation to Washington, D.C. For talks with the Americans, and that he, Premier Doug Ford of Ontario, will be part of that delegation. So, Canadians coming to Washington to the White House, maybe Volodymyr Zelensky coming to Washington to the White House. Who knows who else we'll see in town before long?
Well, indeed, Simon, thank you very much indeed.